I got to tell everybody today I am swimming in anxiety because my poor little puppers has to have a surgery. Apparently dachshunds have this continuing thing where, every breed has their, like humans have done them wrong in one shape or another. With German Shepherds, it's their back hip. With Dobermans, it's their brain and their brain pan. And with dachshunds, apparently, it's their nose and the way that their teeth grow very adjacent to their nose. So he's got this weird thing, so he's got to get it taken care of by surgery. Anyway, I'm swimming in anxiety, and yesterday I'm telling Brad about it. I'm like, I turned to my friend and I'm I'm just so worried for the poor guy. I just hope he pulls through okay. And Brad, in all his infinite dog kindness, is like, yeah, that's real unfortunate. Yep, I'm real worried for the guy. We're all real worried. We're worried for him over here in Philadelphia. I was like, muster a bit of caring for my dog, at least a little bit.
I don't know what you want from me, Dave. I said the right words. As a matter of fact, I said that sounds very painful.
So so this is, it sounds very painful. Let's recreate. So let's show what Brad is like in an emotional relationship.
Yeah,
so Brad's wife comes to him and says, Brad, you are my soulmate. You are everything I need. I love you. And then what does Brad say in return?
That sounds very painful.
Oh my God. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, currently sweating, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And just a reminder, this show is going out live to our friends and pals over at patreon.com/ComicLab at the live gab level. You can watch the show recorded live streamed every week, Tuesday mornings. And if by chance you missed the live recording, it is archived every week. So you can watch the stream. And I'm waving to all our pals right now, checking out the stream. And there's a whole commentary and community running as the stream goes. And Bradley, you've got a special announcement for today as well, right?
Oh, I'm so excited about this. Longtime listeners of the show know that I've been kind of bemoaning the lack of mentorship in the Not Safe for Work comics community, and it's a group that has unique concerns and needs a little bit of information sharing and support. I'm happy to announce that I'm doing a 6-week seminar through Patreon. Have you heard of those A clubs that they have at Patreon? The A, I guess, stands for accountability.
Oh.
This is what I'm starting, an A club through Patreon specifically for creators of Not Safe for Work comics. We're going to meet over a 6-week period. We're going to have discussions on things that are important to specifically our group of creators. And I'm hoping to kind of build it into something bigger, ongoing after the 6 weeks. And so we will also have a Discord server, but it's going to be something I'm really excited about starting on May 11th.
So let me ask you, because based on how you've described it so far, is it through your normal Patreon, or is this a new sub-Patreon that you're starting?
This is through Patreon. This is an official Patreon establishment thing.
Okay, so tell me and everyone the specifics of how they sign up. How do they go about doing it? Because
that's right. You go to events.patreon.com/aclubhub. And if you scroll down, you see the Not Safe for Work Comics Club. That's events.patreon.com/aclubhub.
And when would someone need what's the date that someone needs to sign up by?
Here's the deal. I'm told, I haven't got this officially yet. I'm told that I had a certain number of people that I considered to be the top number of people I could handle. Mm-hmm. I'm told that we hit that in under 24 hours.
Oh, dang. Brad.
But I want you to, the reason I'm sharing this is I want you to sign up for the waiting list for 2 reasons. Number one, just through how things tend to work out, people are going to drop out before May 11th when this whole thing starts.
Sure.
People are going to drop out. As that happens, I'm bringing people up from the wait list. Also, if you're on the wait list, I'll be able to have your contact information so that when we do the next thing, or if we decide to expand this in general, I'll have access to your contact information. I can say, heads up, we're doing this other thing now. We're building this out. We're kind of trying to make it bigger. So if you're interested in this, get on that wait list for a lot of different reasons. Not the worst of which is that as this thing moves on, I can get in touch with you.
I'll tell you why, because Brad Geiger's a people person. He's a people pleaser. If you sign up for that list, he's going to find a way to get you what you need for either this session or the next one, right? Am I right, my friend?
That's right. I'm telling you, I live for this stuff.
I know you're very excited for it, and I know the work that you've put into for years now on preparing and honing the way you should handle this. So this is exciting for people. So Brad, say the URL one more time for folks.
It's events, and that's plural, events.patreon.com/aclubhub. You can also go to my Twitter feed and see me talking about it incessantly. But like I said, don't get upset if you see that it's filled up. Get on that wait list.
Well, that's exciting. I'm excited for that, Brad. And do keep us updated on how it goes and how it's proceeding. I'm sort of fascinated to see how these A clubs work out. So
yeah, I'm excited.
I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for the people that have signed up for it. Well, Brad, our first question today comes in from patreon.com/ComicLab, and it's Pete. Pete writes in, as someone who has made many blunders and mistakes over the years in producing a webcomic, I was curious as to what each of you would consider your biggest mistakes in your career, and most importantly, what did you learn from them? Thanks for the advice, inspiration, and laughs. Well, Pete, that is a really good question. A really good question. All of our mistake, or our biggest mistake. Yeah. Oh, Brad! Brad, unfortunately, is looking at his biggest mistake. I think he's when he said yes 4 years ago. That was Brad's biggest mistake right there.
Deciding to do this podcast, that was on my list. Well, actually, it's funny because as Dave and I was preparing for the show, I said I've got a list of about 10. 10 biggest mistakes, and Dave goes, I kind of have the same list. And I said, I don't think this is just a topic. I think this is an entire show. I think instead of trying to narrow it down to one biggest mistake, I think it would be interesting to devote an entire podcast episode to all of the mistakes that we've made. Right. Because we spend a lot of time telling you about this thing went right, and here's what I'm doing, and this was a big success, and take a look at this. We should, if we're being honest, Dave, we should spend a little bit of time talking about those times that we took a swing and a miss.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's so funny that both Brad and I, when asked this question, the list got longer and longer. Yeah. And then eventually we're like, well, I don't know if we can fit all these onto one show. And I remember saying to Brad, because we both were reading off our list of mistakes, and at one point I was like, well, we both have about 10 or 15. There's no way we're going to get that into an hour. I actually said, well, what are our sexiest mistakes? Like, which ones can we sell as the biggest mistakes? And they're all terrible. So that's great. Yeah. But one of the nice things about this is in sharing our mistakes, we want to show you that you are not alone. We have all made mistakes. You are going to make mistakes. I currently, right now, am aware of mistakes that I'm actively making and trying to fix right now. But so we thought a whole show devoted to this could be a really solid one. So Brad, do you want to start us off with one of your biggest mistakes out of the 48 that you put down?
I'll start off with one that it really did hound me for years, and it was this: I funded my own print run. And that now, to my credit, this was before Kickstarter existed.
Yes, but
I had way overestimated the demand that would be for this book. And I took a bank loan out to cover the print run.
Oh, that's the part that kills me. The bank loan
could have been worse. I could have put it on a credit card, which would have been worse. But I established a business line of credit, put that on, and then to make matters worse, I way overestimated the number of books that I would need. By a factor of about 3. Like I bought about 3 times as many books as I needed. It was just before my comic went from black and white to color. So it's an all black and white book. And I'm telling you, it did not sell. I had boxes and boxes and boxes in the garage, and was paying for it for years and years and years.
So to summarize, you took money that you didn't have to
Right.
buy extra books that you didn't need for a audience size that you didn't yet have.
Yes, it's for an audience that did not want them.
So my first mistake, first of all, because my heart breaks about the bank loan specifically, because that one is, oh God, that one hurts. Especially looking back on it, because I can see younger Brad like, how do I do this? How do I make this work? Trying to be entrepreneurial. How do other businesses do it? They get a bank loan, a business bank loan. And but looking back, you're like, no, don't do that. Oh, God. But the systems weren't in place yet for distributed fundraising, either with Patreon or Kickstarter or, God, any number of ways you could do it now. But that still hurts. Mine is actually very similar to that, Brad. So I, like you, way over-ordered my book 7. I famously told this story on the ComicLab before, but the book was called Still Got It, and that was very prophetic because, Brad, I still got it. I got so many copies of that book. And so what happened was, Brad, I was on book 7 of Sheldon, right? I had left my career at Mattel a couple years earlier. Things were humming along. I was releasing 2 Sheldon books a year, a couple of products like merch and tchotchkes every couple of months. Things were doing great, right? And here's what happened. Here is what happened. I know I can look back and see what happened. Book 2 of Sheldon sold out. And it frustrated me so much that I had book 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I was like, I am going to order enough of 7 so that I never need to have this again. So I need to reorder. But here is the lesson that I should have learned. The book 2 from Sheldon, the one that sold out, was called The Good, the Bad, the Pugly, right? Based on a spoof on the Western. And it had a big pug on the front.
Yep.
And it turned out the lesson that I eventually learned was that what people wanted was pug books, right?
Yep.
That's why book 2 sold out. So why did I order book 7, thousands of more copies than I needed? You dumb shit. And what I should have done, which I did do next, was a pug book, which sold through the roof and went through like 4 printings. And I actually did a 2nd volume, and then I actually did a 3rd volume of pug books because people want that pug book. So I learned the wrong lesson completely and cost myself thousands of dollars and a bunch of storage space in the process.
I remember saying, I said, I may have even said this to you. I know I said it to me, but it's like, go a little high on your estimate for your order because these books don't have an expiration date. You're not ordering milk. It's not going to go sour. It's not going to spoil. As long as you are smart the way you're storing them, they're going to be good. You're going to be able to sell them. I'd go a little bit high. I'll tell you what, I'll be honest with you. Part of me kind of wonders whether it's a little bit better to order low and deal with a reorder than go high and have them sit. I mean, the optimum is taking a correct gauge of your demand and being realistic with yourself about how this thing is going to sell. But I don't know. Sometimes I almost wonder if it wouldn't be a little bit better to shoot low than it is to shoot high.
Yeah, as far as offering actionable advice, the first book is always the hardest to order because you're always really stabbing in the dark of like how many readers can you actually activate, right? That's the hardest one. But once you get to book 2 and the takeaway advice that I would give to everyone on this is buy incrementally from the first order. So get 2%, 5%, tops 10% more than the second, the previous print run that you did. Don't do what I did, which is to say, go big or go home. We're all going to Vegas. I'm buying a bunch of book 7. Because I had an odd sense of self-belief at this point in my career where I was like, it's onwards and upwards. I'm going to the moon, Alice. That kind of thing.
That's right. That's right. If you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's my first mistake. Brad, what is your second mistake that you got for everybody?
Second mistake was sticking with Greystone Inn for 4.5 years. Sticking with a concept that was opaque, a concept that was difficult to explain to people, let alone at that point, I was doing a 4-panel newspaper style comic strip, which, by the way, we're going to be talking. It's not the last time you're going to hear that phrase, I think, today, if I know you and I as well as I know us. I was trying to do a newspaper style comic strip. And it was a comic strip about a comic strip starring a gargoyle. like a hat on a hat on a hat on a hat.
Yeah.
It was like if a comic strip were taped and filmed like a TV show or a movie. I was really strongly influenced by, if you remember, the Larry Sanders Show on HBO, starring Gary Shandling. Loved that show, and I wanted to do a comic strip that had the same feel of being out front stage, and then backstage, and then keep going out on stage, backstage, on stage, backstage. Such a difficult concept to explain, and of course it was hard enough to explain if somebody stopped by my table at a comic convention, but I didn't even have that luxury. I mean, this was the early internet. People were bumping into content that they just happened to find. This is pre-social media, and trying to get across that concept was murder, even with a good about page, even with all the tools that we did have online at the time. It was really difficult to get that concept, and I like a dog with a bone. I could not give that up, and it took me a long time to see that this just isn't working.
Well, and the way you knew Brad found a better pitch was you had a longer elevator pitch, but for Evil Inc., the summary could be corporation for supervillains. You're out in 3 words. Like, that's your elevator pitch, you know, if you wanted to really shrink it down. If I had to shrink down the elevator pitch for Greystone Inn, it's like, all right, hold on, let me make some tea. Oh, we're gonna, all right, here we go. So, and I say that with love because we're about to go through 40 more of my mistakes. So yeah, I agree with you that it's, this is actually a good jumping off point to my second mistake, which is, and I think it's one you probably shared, which I emotionally invested for far too long in chasing after newspaper syndication. Long after it was self-evident, Brad, that I was doing as well, if not better, than a lot of peers that were getting into newspaper syndication. I was still, if I'm being honest about it, harboring a secret hope of, I want them to pick me. Why won't they pick me? I just want to be in syndication. And I didn't need it. It was actually the lesser of the 2 roads. It would have been more stunting in terms of how and where and why I could create. And it would have been the worst. I would have been less happy and less successful had I been syndicated, but I couldn't emotionally give up on it. And it actually impacted the way I handled my career for 5 years longer than it should have, maybe. How about you? Did that impact you as well?
I had the exact same thing. Held on, and in fact, I took your mistake and took it one step further. I self-syndicated. For years, I self-syndicated. In other words, I set up my own syndicate that just handled my comic and sold it to newspapers. I had a very small number of newspapers that actually signed on. It didn't make it for the amount of money or not money, but the amount of time that it took to process these for print and make sure they were set up for correctly, and to put them in a holding place for that the other side could grab them. But this is going deep into the weeds, but there used to be a company, because newspapers didn't put together their own comics pages. There was a company, I think maybe owned by the syndicates, that its whole job was to put together comics pages. Newspapers would buy their comics pages pre-formatted from the company and print them because they didn't want to actually go through the trouble of putting the comic on the pages day after day after day. So I had to put it in a special holding place so that company could grab the comic, put it on the page, send it to the buyer. It was an enormous amount of work for a small amount of money. And just like you, it meant that I stayed with that comic strip format for way too long, because every time I thought about the fact that this was not a good format for today's internet, and this was back in 2010, 2011, that I had realized that comic strips are not the right format. 12 years ago, I came to that decision. And I stuck with it because I didn't want to give up those 1 or 2 papers. That was carrying it, because I still had the whole romance of seeing your comic in print. Remember, I worked in newspapers for 20 years. I've seen plenty of my stuff in print. The newness on that, the sparkle had faded, long worn off, but it meant I just couldn't bring myself to stop it. because it was going, and it took a long time to get it going. And now I couldn't bring myself to stop it. And it meant that I stayed with a bad decision way longer than I should have.
Yeah. I still remember the first or second summer that I got out of school and I was working in Los Angeles at a medical device magazine, which, boy, if you want to talk first boring job after college, I was an editor of a medical device magazine, which, God, Snoresville. And every night I would come home to my apartment, my little apartment in Los Angeles, and I would do a editorial cartoon because my goal for the summer was I'm going to get a comic into the LA Times by the end of the summer. So I produced, 100 editorial cartoons every day. I would send one into the finished comic to the LA Times. Finally, they bought one, Brad. And so a summer's worth of effort. Do you know how much I made for that LA Times? $75. Even then, that was bad, Brad. Even then, that was bad. And I was like, I wanted it so bad. I wanted to be in print. I saw it in print. And then I went, well, now what? And I realized, why was I chasing this print fascination? Like, it was an ego thing for what my childhood wanted, which was I wanted to have everyone in my life open up the newspaper and see my comics in the newspaper. But I realized in that same summer that everything that I was doing online had more immediacy. It had more impact. It was leading towards a better path. And so anyway, it was just one of a billion signs that I should not be chasing print.
And yet I'm going to make a guess. I'm going to make a guess here. Tell me if I'm wrong. If I told you to stop recording right now and go to the newspaper that contains that first print in it, you still have it and you know where to find it.
I actually know where the box is in the garage. Brad, you are
you
not
held
wrong.
on to it all this time.
Oh,
You've
God.
got, by the way, go ahead and ask me how I knew. Go ahead, ask me how I knew.
Brad, by what stretch could you have known that this was the case?
Because the first Greystonian that ever appeared in newspapers is hanging right over there, framed.
Because see, even now there's the mistake of the twinge of nostalgia for what our childhood wanted, you know? And unfortunately, it drove for far too long my creative, my artistic, and my financial decisions around comics. So I was very glad when I finally shook that. And for Brad, I was very glad for you too. It was both of us within about a year and a half, 2 years of each other. We both were like, you know what? Shine it on syndication. So anyway, what is your next mistake, Brad, that you want to go through?
Oh, well, let's see. My next, this is great. Setting the wrong price, not understanding how pricing worked on my first book, and then offering it for distribution.
Oh no, so through like Diamond?
Yes.
Oh no.
I made all the mistakes.
I know where this is going. Okay. Oh God.
Yep. I went print on demand for my first book because I didn't understand how bad that was going to turn out.
Right.
I went print on demand for my first book and offered it to Diamond. And of course, comic shops, even then, number one of anything gets bought like crazy. Number two doesn't. But number one, because everybody wants number one, because collectors always are looking for number one. So number one of my first book, it got an amazing response. I got a way more orders than I thought I would. And but I didn't also understand that Diamond buys a book for 60% off the cover price.
Right.
Of course, that means that your cost to print the book has to be lower than that, or else you're paying money, right? if it costs you more than that number to print the book, then you end up in the situation that a young Brad Geiger ended up, where my book got I forget how many 500 orders or something like that.
Right.
I got a big amount of orders, and I was losing hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And not only was I not making money on the deal, I was paying Diamond hundreds of dollars to take my book and sell it. This is literally the way that this whole thing ended up. I had to pay money to sell my first book.
So for those of you that are business minded, this is the strategy of losing money on each unit, but making it up on volume, right, Brad?
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm losing on every book, but I'll just sell more of them. Oh, God.
Except I never made it up on volume.
Why do I keep digging this hole? Oh, God.
Yeah, it was, I didn't understand the whole idea of 60% off the cover price.
Yeah.
I did the mistake that everybody makes at this point. I said, well, this is what Marvel charges for a book. I'll charge the same thing. Well, Marvel prints 100,000 copies at a time without thinking twice. Their unit cost is pennies.
Yeah,
I was doing
pennies.
print on demand.
Yeah. My
My unit cost was within $1 or $2 of the retail price. Right. On print on demand, you're barely making a profit if somebody buys one.
Yeah.
Now not only did I have to buy all these books, but then I had to ship them to 3 different places. So I couldn't just say, hey, I think I was using lulu.com, which, by the way,
oh my God,
I loved. They were great. I knew the people personally. I called them up. I told them the situation I was in to see if they could work something out. They did as much as they could for me. They were great people. But I couldn't even go to the printer and say, hey, print however many number of copies and send them. Don't send them to me. Send them to this place. I couldn't even do that. So I had to pay for the printing.
Twice shipping. Oh,
I
God.
had to pay for shipping to my house. And then I had to pay for shipping out to the distributor.
Oh, mother of pearl.
I lost hundreds on the deal. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. And it's all because I didn't understand distribution, didn't understand pricing. And I'd made the decision to go print on demand, which was not if you're going to go into distribution, it is not the right decision to make.
Those two business models and pricing, more specifically, do not work together, of distribution and print on demand. Also, the other mistake you made there, Brad, was getting involved with Diamond in any way, shape, or form. So for those that don't know, in North America, we used to, in the 70s, 80s, and I think into the 90s, have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 distributors for comics. And then there was the great comics dieback, which I don't know, I guess you could put it in the 90s. And anyway, Diamond became the sole distributor for comics to North America. So if a comic shop wanted a Marvel or DC or an Image comic, they would have to go to Diamond. Yeah. And what Diamond would do is, using their state-of-the-art computers, which was a 75-year-old woman named Gladys with a fax machine.
Oh my God.
It was so backward. I don't know if they've updated it now, but like, it's like spit and baling wire holding Diamond together as a business.
Yeah. The accounting was either old and had never been upkept, or it was purposefully obtuse because it was impossible to see what you were actually owed without doing a redunculous amount of accounting.
Yeah.
That was either a mistake or it was a function. I was never quite sure which.
I think that was a feature on that. And so the whole business model was rickety, is the way I would describe it. It was all just rickety. And so it's another reason yet why we avoid comic book shops, because dealing with Diamond is the worst. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. All right, well, time for our quick mid-show update. Brad, you've got big news from this weekend, or I think it's big news anyway. You went to your first Comic-Con in 2.5 years, right? Attended, not exhibited.
I did not exhibit. My son says to me Friday, hey, Fan Expo is this weekend. We should go. And he says, tickets are only $40. I said, that sounds great. And I was, and besides, literally anytime, like one of my sons says, "Hey, let's do something together," I don't care what it is, I'm in. It's like, well, we're going to go.
Start hearing, "Well, the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon." You're like, "Yes, I'll go with you. I'll go with you."
And both of my sons really are fun to hang around with. So I'm like, yeah, I don't care what we're doing. We'll do it. Well, then I go to the website. $40 was for Friday. For Saturday was $60 a ticket. So
now readers at home will hear Brad's cheapness starting to crouch in on the story here.
$180 later. I'm like, okay, all right, that's fine. That's okay. We can do this. So we go to Fan Expo. Now, Dave, you're wondering to yourself, I've never heard of Fan Expo before.
That is what I was saying to myself, actually, yes.
It's Wizard World. it's Wizard World. It's the same company. It's the same group. I don't know whether they filed Chapter 11 or what they did, but they restructured their business and they rebranded it as Fan Expo. And I think this is notable. They presented themselves as a pop culture exhibition.
Sure,
There's no more
they did.
pretending to be comic convention. This is a place to go get celebrity autographs, see cosplay, buy things, and I think in that regard, it's actually a step up because there's no pretending that this is a comic convention anymore. And I will tell you this: there were way fewer actual comics artists and cartoonists there, even in Artist Alley. Way fewer people who were doing actual comics than I've seen at any convention that I'd gone to in a long time. And that actually made me happy because it's like, good. There's nothing here for a comics artist. There's nothing here.
Right, right.
There's no business to be made. There's no money to be made, no business to be done. So I was actually happy to see not a lot of actual comics folks there. But what I did see there, and we were there on Saturday in Philly, huge crowds.
Really?
Huge. Like it was a Saturday convention the way you and I remember Saturday conventions, shoulder to shoulder on the show floor, hard to get around once you got to certain places. And then here's the other thing I do need to tell you about. I'd say fewer than 35% of them had masks on.
Oh, dang. Really? Well,
because Philly's
Brad,
actually
let's talk in a week and see how their surge is doing in Philly.
Philly has actually done really good with vaccinations. I think my wife was telling me it's one of the highest in the nations for vaccinations, but they had got rid of their indoor mask mandate. And of course, Fan Expo didn't enforce their own regulation. So it was just up to everybody, and everybody was like, well, COVID's over. I'm going to go and go to a show. So the good news is lots of people there. The bad news is lots of people there without masks on.
Well, I should follow up by saying yesterday, Philadelphia was the first city in the U.S. to reinstate a mask mandate, I saw.
Yes, I saw that too, and I wondered if it was connected.
Yeah, you missed a mass crowd by about one day. Well, anyway, related to your update, I should tell you that for those that were paying attention, San Diego Comic-Con had a 90-day out where you could get a full refund on your booth if you gave them notice 90 days ahead of time. And we're now well within inside the 90 days, Brad. So it looks like I'm going to San Diego Comic-Con. Hopefully that goes all right. I'm both excited and trepidatious and anxious and excited about going, which is you know what, frankly, par for the course for my heart with most decisions that I make. Yeah. It's a wonderful battle of joy and anxiety in my heart about going to Comic-Con. So
I knew. Listen, I knew when you put that deposit down, you were going, because just out of not out of like well, I knew he was going to do it, but what information could you have possibly gotten by now that would have talked you out of it, other than an absolute catastrophe? What information could you have had by now that you would have talked you out of it?
Right. Well, and you and I and everyone listening knows that the only real planning you can do in this pandemic is about a week ahead of time, because you look at the numbers and you go, all right, well, So at this point, I'm either in for a very profitable show, because I think if it goes and I go, I think I'm going to make a lot of money, because it's 3 years of pent up spending on both my and the general audience's part. Right. I think it's going to be a huge money moneymaker. If I don't go, I lose at this point a couple $1,000 on the booth. So it's neither one is ruinous. One is particularly good, but well, anyway, I'm excited at the possibility of going to Comic-Con. And now, Brad, speaking of mistakes, let's jump back in on your next mistake. Was it my turn or your turn? I actually forget.
Oh, please let it be your turn.
All right.
Go. I think it's your turn because I think we both were talking about syndication.
I will say this. I related to San Diego Comic-Con. I will give a long-standing mistake of mine and of Brad's. I think. Yeah. I shouldn't speak for you though. Was that in my 20s there were more than a few Comic-Cons. More than a few that I went to with either the suspicion that I would lose money or the knowledge that I would lose money. And I still went because I was like the 20-year-old optimist of like, this is the year. This is when I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it happen. And then I'd go and I'd lose $500 or $1,000 and be like, well, we'll try again next year for Baltimore Comic-Con or whatever it is. Yeah. And I only by trial and error did I get down to eventually 3 and then down to 2. And I think now down to 1 Comic-Con that I do. Yeah. And it's just San Diego Comic-Con I've talked about all the economics around for me personally, why I still do that show. It's still a huge moneymaker. I have family in San Diego. It's a drive down, not a fly down from Los Angeles. So all my transport is affordable. Anyway, for a billion reasons, that's still the one show I do. But in my 20s, I think like you, Brad, I did way too many shows that I lost my shirt on.
Yeah, and when I talk about the gambler's mentality of comic conventions, I talk from first person experience because what would happen? You'd sit there on the show floor with a bunch of other people who were losing money at conventions. Nobody was admitting it, but they were all a bunch of them were losing money or lying about it. And they'd say, well, the thing about it this year is that this year I got a bad placement on the show floor. That's why I'm not doing.
Oh, I'm near the kitchens, Brad. That's the reason why I'm losing money. Or Brad, all 3 Star Trek captains were here this year. That's the reason why I lost money.
But next year I'm going to another show next week and it's going to be better, and then you'd get into that gambler's mentality because you'd go to the next show and maybe you'd do a little bit better. Maybe you'd break even. Maybe you brought home a couple $100, right? And then you'd go to the next show and you'd lose a couple $100. And then you'd keep going, and then you'd keep trying to figure out, well, why is it? Well, is it the show floor? Is it because I didn't have anything new on my table? There's another one, Dave. I didn't do good at this convention because I didn't have anything new on my table. So many reasons, reasons to self-delusion. And really what it was this is not the place to go to make money. This was a place really a long time ago that you could do this. In fact, I was talking one guy I recognized at Fan Expo, and we were talking about the good old days of Wizard World Philadelphia. And he said, I used to make bank here. I used to come home really happy. And I had 1 year like that, 1 year that I cleaned up. I sat there. One of those moments, literally, I told Carolyn, it's nowhere but up from here. Right. This is it. This is the beginning of the year of Brad right here.
Let's put the down payment on the solid gold car because here it comes.
And of course, the very next convention, I gave back most or all of those profits. And just, instead of taking a somber, objective, analytical look at the whole idea of comic conventions, I was doing all the cargo culting. Well, this other person had a bright yellow price list. I need a bright yellow price list. This other person had a spot on the show floor that was and on and on and on I go, trying to cargo cult success instead of where I finally got to. Good Lord, but finally it took me until 2015, I think. I got to go back and look when the first time I started writing about this for webcomics.com, where I said, hey, I got news for you folks. This comic convention thing, it ain't working for us independents. We need to find something else to do. We need to find other places for our business because this thing ain't working. It took me way too long to figure it out, though.
Yeah. I mean, my only silver lining for the fact that, and I've tried about 25 Comic-Cons in North America and Canada and US. And The only silver lining that I can come from this is that A, I learned not to do them again.
Yeah.
And B, I did learn the 2, maybe 3, if I'm stretching it, shows where I can actively make a profit. And by actively, I mean on a recurring basis every year, year after year after year. Definitely at San Diego Comic-Con. Less so at Emerald City Comic Con, which is probably why I didn't go this year. I don't know that I'll go back. And there were some other shows, but anyway, that's the only silver lining that I can take from all the shows that were wasted. I mean, I guess friendships are. I did get the power of friendship, Brad, out of some of those cons.
You didn't get to meet a few people, but yeah, I agree with you there.
Well, now, what is your next mistake, my friend? In this long tirade of mistakes that you and I have made over our career,
I'd rather keep listening to yours, but I guess I definitely have more on my list. Here's one. I stuck with the comic strip format for way too long. Right. I had started out as a newspaper comic strip guy. Yeah, that's 3 to 4 panels. I grew up loving comic strips that had storylines that developed throughout them. Even if it was just a storyline that went on for a week, or whether it was storylines that were carried out over the year. And here I'm talking about the greats like Calvin and Hobbes, Bloom County, Doonesbury, all of these humor strips that had underlying storylines, 4 panels at a time, because that worked in newspaper format.
Right.
And I ported that over to internet, and it was very quickly became evident that the internet was capable of supporting longer storytelling, longer swings at story. And I stuck with that. I tried to do story 4 panels at a time, way longer. And part of that was because of that self-syndication thing. But I stayed with that. Like a dog with a bone, I stayed with that idea of doing a story strip 4 panels at a time. And I'm telling you, it didn't take until 2012 when I rebooted, reimagined. It was really kind of at that point, I took and decided I'm going to make a change on everything. And that's when I started to rethink my comic as a graphic novel. And instead of posting updates 4 panels at a time, I posted updates of a half page at a time. My typical update is between 7 and 8 panels, a lot more story swing. You can get a lot more done. Storytelling wise, you can take a little bit more time finessing a joke, finessing a punchline, building that setup. A 4 panel setup is a very, very difficult thing to do. To do that and do a story
it's very
in
finite.
To do that and doing a story in a newspaper environment was actually quite easy, because that reader was forced to read your stuff day after day again. To do a 4 panel comic on the web, on the social media dominated web, is almost impossible, right? Yeah. So it really is.
It really is.
By the time I finally came to grips with that and started publishing my stuff differently, I saw how much easier it was, how much better it was. My writing improved because I had a little bit longer time to develop a thought. Everything improved. I wish I had done it years earlier, but I stuck with that 4 panel newspaper because that's what I was brought up in, and that's what I still wanted to be, and I had to let go of that childish ideal.
I will say amen to that, because boy, am I victim of the same mistake. And I'll even add to it, which is I continue to enjoy the strip format as a strip for Sheldon. Like I enjoy the setup, build up, punchline setup that is a comic, not necessarily for story, but you know me with Sheldon for the last, 5 to 8 years, there hasn't been a lot of story. It's mostly been a lot of punchlines, which is fine. Anyway, that's what I like it to be right now. But here's my additional mistake with the comic strip format is not realizing that I was emotionally sticking with horizontally presenting comic strips
Yes.
for way too long, way too
Yes.
long. And here is all you need to know when you're making a decision that is based on tradition. You always step back and say, if I were starting this process right now from whole cloth, would I design a comic strip to run horizontal?
Yes.
No, you would not. There's a reason why Webtoons has taken off like wildfire, and it's because it's easily scrolling for long form or even short form rather, but vertically, right? That vertical scroll is the way to do it. You would
because
not
people
design.
are reading on their phones.
Yes.
They're not reading it in a newspaper. They're not reading it on a desktop screen, which is also horizontal.
So if you're designing for horizontal, you're designing for a system that worked best for newspapers, not for the web, and especially not for mobile. So I'm like Brad. I stuck with the comic strip too long for what should have been a story format, and I stuck with horizontal too long. Yeah,
and I see on Twitter every now and again. We talked about not too long ago. Even if you are doing like a horizontal 4-panel. I was advocating, taking 2 panels on top, 2 panels on the bottom to make that into a square so that it reads better on your phone.
Right.
So somebody doesn't have to pinch and zoom your horizontal row of 4 panels. You should see the amount of pushback on that from people who are making the same mistakes that we did, holding on to that newspaper idea, holding on to that vertical or that horizontal strip.
Yep.
Just the idea of just doing 2 panels up, 2 panels down, even if those panels aren't the same size, just finding some way of fitting that into a square. The pushback on that is amazing. And all I can do is look at that and say, I get it. I made the mistake. You're making a mistake. I can see it's a mistake. Yeah. I can tell you it's a mistake, but you're never going to understand it until you finally come to that same place that I had to come to. I can't do it for you.
Yeah,
but it's frustrating to see somebody make the same mistakes that you made. It's like, I've already done that. Make your own mistakes.
Yeah, some mistakes are just like a kid with a stove. You've got to touch it and realize that it's hot before you like you can't logic your way through why you shouldn't do a thing. You've got to make the mistake on your own. Well, I will jump into my next mistake, and this is, I'll be honest, there's still twinges of this in my personality now, which is I still emotionally invest way more than I should, which is anything more than 1% is more than I should, into awards like Eisner's or Rubens or maybe a Hugo, or like I will admit it is 100% ego. I do not need an award. It would change my career trajectory, not at all. It wouldn't necessarily impact sales aside from probably a little blip after the announcement. Mm-hmm. And yet, I will admit, for far too long, I emotionally invested of like, that's a brass ring I've got to get to. Yes. And I will tell you that even now, if I got nominated, there's a tiny part of me that would be like investing a little bit too much in the outcome of that award. Yes. But I should not, because I have seen friends who have won multiple awards. I'd rather have my career than their career in terms of like financially, in terms of structure, in terms of editorial. I would rather have my career. So why am I trying to chase this brass ring for years of really trying to get it when I'm perfectly happy with what I have with my career right now?
I ditto, 100% ditto. I finally this year did something for my own mental health that I'm probably going to make a permanent. I didn't submit for any awards this year. For the first time in my professional life, I submitted for nothing because I didn't want, and by the way, it's April right now when we're recording this. Okay. This is when the announcements start to come out. And traditionally, this is when I start feverishly checking my email, are they saying anything yet? Are they saying anything yet?
Has Jackie Estrada emailed me? Yeah.
I had a search set up for the words Eisner and Rubin and NCS, all of these searches. And then, of course, finally the words come out. I search for my name, never finding it. And then I get depressed and I call Dave and I start going through these names saying, this fucking guy, they're nominating this fucking guy. And I have reclused myself of all of that. I didn't sign up. I know I'm not going to get nominated, and I couldn't be happier about it. I haven't suffered any of that, and I've never been so happy in April.
Yeah, I listen again. This is a mistake that I will admit to myself that there is a tiny twinge that would still love it more than I should admit, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still submitting. That's all you need to know. I'm still submitting. So clearly, there's a part of me that would love to get an Eisner or a Rubin or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
thankfully, I have moved away in a way that only I can quantify. I've moved away from the intensity that I had 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's been a net positive for me, is that I realized that they are not as important as I used to think that they are. They are a mere ego blip for a second, and then you're back to your same career the next day, you know? So, Brad, what is your next mistake that you want to, when you want to, wait, what?
No, I know what I'm going to talk about next, because as we were talking on the phone, my wife, she hears you and I talking about the show, right? And we're talking about, we're going to do our biggest mistakes. She yells from the other room, "Daily Grind Iron Man Challenge." Was a huge mistake. Let's talk about it. The Daily Grind Iron Man Challenge was this. Somebody came up with a challenge. You had to put, I forget, $10 in, $20 in. Okay. I think the pot for this thing was $200-$300. Keep that in mind. A really paltry sum, $200 or $300, right? And the idea and by the way, such a machismo kind of competition. Once you entered, you had to publish a comic every day. I think I didn't have a Sunday comic, so it must have been 6 days a week. You had to publish a comic 6 days a week. You couldn't go for more than 2 days without publishing a comic. And that comic had to be at least 2 panels long. Okay, that was the competition.
You had to have some modicum of sequentiality, and it had to be every day.
And there was one person that was like judging whether this was an actual comic, right? Well, as you might imagine, this went on for years. And a bunch of us had signed up for it. I signed up immediately because I was doing this. I'd been doing 6 days a week for years at that point. I had gone into self-syndication. There was no way I was not going to have 6 days a week. It was in the bag for me. What they never did was they never established a quality. So there was a couple people who made like crayons or big ballpoint pens, horrible drawings. and the writing was imperceptible.
You can see the logo on the Denny's menu as part of the problem.
You'd have like 2 panels that had words in them. I don't know how those words connected from panel 1 to panel 2, but these guys went for years doing these 2-panel, done with a big ballpoint pen, imperceptible writing, but I was not going to fucking lose to them. And I stuck with it was another factor that had
broken arm, case of the flu, death in the family. Brad's like, no, I'm not losing this Iron Man challenge.
Not going to lose to the guy with a big ballpoint pen. I'm not going to do it. And it was another factor that had me sticking with that format that was not working.
Really?
For way too long.
For $200, Brad.
So that I could win $200. And honest to goodness, I think and finally in 2012, when I decided this is it, I'm making some big changes. I've got to, because this is not working. I knew when I made that change, I was going to lose the Iron Man challenge, and I was going to get emails from one of the 2 guys that was still in it saying, "Oh, well, good job, you made a good showing." I stuck with it way too long. and when I finally did let loose and voluntarily, like, it's not like I missed a deadline. I said, okay, I'm stopping here. And the next week, I know that I'm not going to hit this. I don't even know whether that $200 still existed. I mean, that went into one person's PayPal account. I'm sure they did accounting. I'm sure, but this person had to hold on to that $200 for years and finally make the payout to somebody. And it wasn't me. And Who cares? $200. It would have made no difference in my life whatsoever. $200. And I let that make so many decisions for me.
Yeah, the universal here is that all of us, especially in our 20s and 30s, we just crave some form of outside validation. Any form.
Yeah.
It's the same reason we were talking about like those top webcomics lists. Like we just want something that says we're on the right path. And so for you, part of it was as a friend, I'm saying this, I think you just needed a win. And the fact that you were still in Daily Iron Man Challenge, you just needed that win. You're just like, damn it, I may not have this or that, but I've got the Daily Iron Man Challenge and I'm winning that. Yeah. Meanwhile, all of 4 people that were participating were paying attention, And so
nobody paid attention past the first week. The first week, everybody was like, oh, did everybody, they were all checking. Yep, everybody published. After the first month, nobody was paying attention to this thing except us. Yeah. And it was all machismo. It was all, stupid. It was so stupid. But again, for $200, that didn't make a difference in anybody's life.
Well, let me jump into my next mistake, my friend, because we're coming up on the hour and I want to get a few more mistakes in.
You're right. We're not going to get all our mistakes in.
No, we're not going to get all our mistakes in. Our other mistake was trying to get all these mistakes in. That's our other mistake. So anyway, I want to talk about years ago, many people, but I think primary among them and earliest among them was our friend Kevin McShane, who was excellent cartoonist, excellent humor writer, excellent creator, currently at BuzzFeed. He said, you got to make your websites mobile friendly, Dave. Yeah. I know you've loved the desktop format. You got to make them mobile friendly. And I literally did the, get out of here, kid. You're bothering me kind of a hand wave, Scram, kid. What do you know? And I will be honest that a little bit life got a hold of me. I became a parent of little ones and that took away from stuff. Life got busy, this, that. But I should have put more effort into that years and years ago. Only now am I finally putting the finishing touches on the new Drive site, which will be mobile friendly, and a bunch of other stuff that'll have on it. And then eventually I have to tackle the Sheldon site. But I should have done this, Brad. I don't even know, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. I should have done it a long time ago. And it's my own fault because we all become inured to our traditions. Inured, is that the right word?
That's a good word. That's a good word.
We all become stuck in our traditions. And for me, having willfully thrown away syndication, I then got stuck in my own tradition of like, well, web comics are desktop comics. That's what they are. Right. That's what works. Meanwhile, Webtoons is stratospherically growing. And by comparison, Go Comics is not at all stratospherically growing. Like the writing was on the wall as to what worked. I did not go mobile, and it was to my detriment.
And not only is Webtoons doing great, but your readers are reading on social media, and that is horizontal. It literally, nobody is, I'm sorry, that is vertical. That's vertical. Nobody's reading horizontal anymore. They're reading social media in a vertical scroll. Everything they're reading is on a vertical scroll. And if you can't take a little bit of time to format for that, you're missing out. And that goes for your website too. But I don't feel good for you at this point, because this point that you're going through now is the hard point. Getting all those comics reformatted and getting them built is tough.
Yeah. Well, you know this as well as anybody. Slicing up a page that was designed to look good as a page into vertical slices is sometimes an exercise in just anger. You're like, I can't make this look good. There's no way to make this slice look good. Anyway, so we have to turn 500 drive strips we guesstimated into about 3,000 sliced panels for mobile reading. But when it's done, it's going to look amazing. I just hate my life right now is where I am. So Brad, let's speed round our last couple of mistakes here. What do we got next?
Speed round. I'll give you two. One of which it has a better story behind it. It took me a long time to really be objective about my writing, specifically my humor writing, also my story writing. I let myself off the hook an awful lot for comedy writing in the first 2 or 3 years of doing Greystone Inn. I was really trying to find my voice, and I was being a little bit more forgiving than I should have been. It wasn't until I really started forcing myself to push that concept to where the real funny was. I was walking away with clever when I should have pushed to funny. Wasn't until I was a lot more vicious with myself that I think I started to write better. But even more than that, and this is one that really was a detriment. For a long time, I was hyper focused on quitting my day job. I did not consider myself an official cartoonist. I did not consider myself genuine, valid, worthy as a comics artist, as a cartoonist, until I had quit that day job. And it became an obsession towards the end of getting the hell out of that place so I could be a real cartoonist, right? And of course, the upshot of that is I quit my day job or I left it on a Friday, came back in Monday, and I was the only person who noticed the difference.
Yeah, isn't that interesting though, that is yet again for both of us, another external artificial form of validation that we set up for ourselves of like, if blank, then cartoonist, like if award, then cartoonist, if day job, then cartoonist, all these if then statements of like, if I can just get this, then I will feel validated, then I will be a cartoonist. Yeah. And only in looking back do we realize that we were needlessly beating ourselves up over some form of, it's a very human thing though. We all just want love. We want validation. And so I get it. But I share that exact feeling when I wanted to leave Mattel. That was the validation I was seeking, was now I am official, that kind of thing.
Yep. Now I'm a real little boy. So Dave, what's your final big mistake?
Well, oh boy, I got more. Which one to choose from here? All right, I will tell you one of the ones that was a stinger in my 20s was allowing myself, even tangentially, to getting involved in unnecessary webcomics and cartooning drama in my 20s online. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this still, I'm assuming that it still does with teens and 20-year-olds online somehow in terms of cartoons and comics, that there's drama. But I didn't need it. I didn't need to be involved with it. I didn't need to be involved with people that were doing it. It felt very high school, the whole thing. And I'm so glad that I'm of an age now where I'm like, what drama? Who did what now? I have no idea what's happening. Because
just not I don't care any of it.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't need to care. And I'm happy actively choosing not to care about any drama around comics. And we both, Brad and I, have fallen back to put your head down, get your work done, and try to be a good person. And that's the best you can do in comics, I think, is the short form.
Well, I'll tell you what, and by the way, I have to commend you because you have done that. You have put your head down and you have put your work out on a regular basis. And one of the things that you just put out was another episode of ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I was going to make a put-out joke, but I'm not going to do that. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
Oh my God, Stripped. I didn't even get into the 40 mistakes that I made with Stripped, but that's a whole nother show. The ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
You love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. You may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ I still had more mistakes on my list. But Brad, here's the final point, the wonderful exclamation point we can put on all of these mistakes. Everything that you made as a friend, everything that I made as a friend, all the mistakes that we're currently making and that we have yet to make, and all the mistakes that our listeners are making. Yeah. We're still here, Brad. We're still cartooning.
There's not a one of those mistakes that sunk us. They vex us. They haunt us at night sometimes. But there's not a one of those mistakes, let alone we each had a list of about 10. There's not a one of those or a combination of those that was able to stop us from doing what we wanted to do. If anything, a number of them made us smarter, made us stronger, made us wiser, made us more better at making decisions. None of them stopped us. We're still doing it.
Yep. And so the capstone there is that mistakes are going to happen. Are you currently making mistakes? Did you make mistakes? Absolutely. Pick yourself up, keep going, because this is a joy-filled art form. Yeah. And God, I love being a cartoonist, as I know Brad does. It is wonderful. These mistakes did not stop us. I honestly think all these mistakes and 40 more that I could have brought up into the show, I am now happily living my best life. And even with the knowledge that I'm currently making mistakes and will make more mistakes, it is a great art form to do.
Absolutely. And listen, if you're listening to that thinking, well, then I'm going to make all these mistakes and I'll be just like these two. No, that's not the point either. We're still going to be here next week trying to give you advice on not making the mistakes we made, but we want you to go out and use that information to make your own new mistakes. Then come back and tell us about them.
That's right. That's right. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.